Hi. The biggest question startups and small businesses have that they outsource their DevOps requirement. Usually, when we talk about outsourcing Android app development, application development, marketing, if I may, a lot of startups and small scale businesses think about that they should be outsourced or they hire an in-house team. But when we talk about DevOps, which is actually quite an integrated part these days, so can you actually outsource that? And if yes, what are the possible ways and how that is possible? We are going to discuss in this particular video. Ever since the pandemic has happened, a lot of people and a lot of companies and obviously almost everyone around the globe worked remotely for a certain duration of time. Now what happened? This gave a shift towards the work culture. The work moved from in-house to the remote environment. Now since it moved towards the remote environment, the requirement of a technology increased fourfold. So when a manufacturing company was working, they could actually monitor what is happening there and they could actually see what is happening at the ground level. But when they had to sit at home, so obviously that created a different segment where they needed a tech solution which could actually answer their questions. All the processes which are happening in the manufacturing department were dependent on that particular tech solution. So you can understand, if you need these kind of tech solution, irrespective of the industry you are in, you have to make sure that the tech product are released in a way so that it can actually work properly. And this is where DevOps comes in. Now, the biggest question almost everyone has, like if I'm going to hire someone for DevOps, obviously their salary is very higher. Secondly, there is a constant employee poaching which is happening. So like, let's say if you're offering a person X amount of money, another company may offer them Y amount of money with the bonuses and advances. So like obviously the person has the tendency of switching there. So a lot of companies and small businesses tend not to use DevOps, which actually hurt their progress. We have a lot of clients where we have seen that they are actually struggling because of that. And when they think about outsourcing, the biggest question of their mind is, should we outsource that or not? So you can understand that this is actually creating a huge bottleneck for the companies if they are not able to hire a proper set of people. So let's try to understand how the process is possible, and let's dig deeper into this particular topic. Now, first of all, let's try to understand why DevOps is going to be important for your particular product you're working on. So obviously, if we talk about the agile model of the product development, usually what happens, we have the tendency of releasing the product, or I should say versions, as soon as possible. We don't wait 8 to 9 months to release a new update. So basically what we do, we start with the continuous integration. So you want to make sure everything is integrated and working properly. In the next phase, we move towards the testing part of it. So we are testing out if the features which we have included are working properly or not. After that, we have to make sure that it is available across all the devices. So like, let's say you have an Android application, you have an iOS application, you have a web application. So it is working across everywhere. It is actually working properly the way it should be. And the finally part is monitoring the applications across all the platforms. So if an application has a bug and something, so that it reaches to the person, or I should say the concerned person who is responsible for that, instantaneously, so the flow of the development actually is not hampered. Now you can understand, if you're developing a tech product, this kind of a methodology, if I talk about, it is very, very vital for a company. And this is the reason most of the companies, or I should say big companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, tend to go towards DevOps, because they want to make sure that the product, since it is going to be live 24/7, it works 24/7, and minimum amount of bugs or errors are coming when the users are using that particular product. Now, a lot of companies ask us, like, if they are actually building their own DevOps team instead of outsourcing, what are the number of people they should be hiring and what are the various roles and responsibilities they should be given. Now, obviously, I just want to be very upfront and honest with you that there is technically no right answer for that. This is something which we have followed. This is something which we have seen various companies doing it, and it has worked for us. So that is why this is something which I'm going to suggest to you. So first of all, you would be requiring a team lead. Now, obviously, in DevOps term, you would be saying DevOps team lead, but in simple terms, I would say you would be requiring a team lead, or I should say a senior person who understand DevOps in and out. Because obviously, if you are implementing this kind of a scenario, or I should say this methodology, you need someone who has a good level of experience. Then you would be needing someone who would be actually having the responsibility of releasing and updating all the codes and the features in the application, because without that person, that is going to get very difficult for you. Next part is automation person, like the person who is going to manage all the automation part of it. Because obviously, if we talk about DevOps is one of the biggest user, or I should say sort of a biggest consumer of something, which is what we call as automation. So basically what happens if you are not following the automation part of it, like if your application is not being tested automatically, if your application is not being monitored automatically, or if the deployment is not happening automatically, obviously it becomes very difficult for you to actually release the application at such pace. Then if we talk about the IT operations person, so IT operations person take care about the infrastructure part of it. So like what kind of a machines would be required, what kind of a configuration would be required. So you can understand that this is getting a bit complex for a very specific reason. When you have to hire these amount of people, obviously not everyone can do everyone's role. Now the final point which I would say, like, obviously is the person who is going to analyze the data. So whatever data is being generated, what kind of a report is being generated, the person can actually reach out to the right concerned person and remind them, okay, this is something which is happening. Now I have mentioned these roles and responsibilities, and these are not the only roles and responsibilities, but you have to understand, as a startup, or I should say as a small business, it gets a bit complex when you have to do all the things in-house. Now I'm not saying that in-house is obviously always bad, but what I want to mention, if you are a small business, because if you're a large enterprise, if you're a large company, obviously hiring a resource or two, it's not a big deal for you. You have a HR team, you have a finance team, you have everyone who can take care of it. But when you're a small business, when you are a startup, if I may, the poaching part and like hiring a person at a proper salary is going to be a very challenging part for you. So you have to understand, like, these could be some of the difficulties, if I may, we will be discussing in detail. But these are the various roles you have to actually hire when you are building an in-house DevOps team. Now, when you give responsibility of DevOps, what are their responsibility? What they have to take care of? What are the certain parameters they have to hit? So first of all, obviously the planning part is quite important. Planning, testing, if I may, and deploying of the application for a very specific reason. You're releasing application as soon as it is updated, or I should say as soon as the feature is added. Once you feel like, okay, testing is done, it is working sufficiently good for us, then you would be actually releasing the application. Then you have to make sure that the continuous integration and continuous deployment has a proper support, because obviously there is a good possibility that it may break in between. So you have to understand this could be a possible disaster and issue when you're developing a fully fledged DevOps team, if I may. Then automation part, as I have discussed, this is something which you cannot totally ignore. Then if I talk about the incident management, so like let's say a bug has been reported from a different software, it has to be reported to a certain person, it has to reach there. And finally, as I mentioned, the monitoring part, understanding how the application is working. Does it need scaling up? Does it need vertical scaling, or I should say horizontal scaling? So you can understand that these are the few roles and responsibilities which has to be monitored, or I should say these are the various things which has to be taken care of when you are actually developing an application through the DevOps methodology. Because I'll be very honest with you, if you're not going to follow this, if any of these steps are actually missed, what happens? People tend to go away from that, or I should say people move away from the applications which have full of bugs, because obviously this is something which they don't feel like is worth their time. Now, obviously as a business, you can say that if that is the case, there are so many responsibilities, there are so many roles, I have to hire so many people. I'm a small business, I'm a startup, let's move away from it. I don't want to actually go with the DevOps methodology. I'll have someone who will actually do the older way of doing things and we will be fine. But let me actually point out, there are actually advantages, I should say, when you're following the DevOps methodology, and there is a specific reason these big companies are doing. First of all, like let's talk about the development cycle. The development cycle actually reduces to a very short duration of time for a very specific reason, because we are following a certain timeline, if I talk about, or certain way of doing things. Then if we talk about the team which is working there, so everyone is actually using the other skill set, or I should say everyone is combining their skill set, so it becomes a stronger team. Now this is very important, because if we talk about an individual or the team is broken into different pieces, then it becomes very difficult to actually combine their power. In DevOps, everyone, or I should say every individual, can contribute together to actually achieve the goal of releasing a bug-free software. Then if we talk about the efficiency part of it, so obviously efficiency is something which is the vital requirement for a small startup, or I should say small business. Why? Because if you're releasing new feature, your competitor is probably also releasing new feature. So you have to make sure that you're releasing, or I should say you're reaching out to the market as soon as possible. I discussed with so many companies together, and the biggest concern for them is that we are losing customer for a very specific reason. We are not able to keep up with the development pace. Now, obviously, if the customer does not find the required features, they are going to move away from that. Then if we talk about something which is very vital, and as a human being that is required, communication. Communication is something which is a core part of DevOps. The information which is supposed to flow from stage 1 to the stage, I should say the last stage, happens every single time. So when you're initiating something or when you're ending something, the information is actually shared with all the stakeholders. The advantage we get here, if something may go wrong, the person who can actually find that issue can actually fix that issue at that instance. So you can understand, if this sort of a communication happens quite clearly, or I should say quite easily within the team, it makes our application development quite faster. Then if we talk about the reduced recovery times, obviously you're not going to make any more errors. So this gives us the specific advantage compared to the other methodology. And finally, the most important point is we get a proper reliability, or I should say reliable timeline, or I should say the pipeline for the DevOps application or methodology for a very specific reason. We as a stakeholder are aware of it, what is happening. And the last but not the least, or I should say the bonus point, it helps us cost saving. You won't believe that there are so many companies which are actually not able to leverage the DevOps because the lack of understanding. But the companies who are understanding, they are actually saving a lot of cost. Now you can say that how that is possible, because this is happening and you already told me that there are so many people to be hired. Well, the answer is it improves the efficiency of the team. It reduces the error which is happening. So obviously if your application, if I may, is going to get better, so this is going to actually help you with cost saving. Now, if you're an IT manager, you're probably thinking, okay, what is in for me? Why should I actually go for DevOps methodology compared to going with the traditional way of it? So obviously, if I talk about the advantages you are going to get as an individual, is obviously the software performance, or I should say the application performance, is going to improve. You're going to release the software with the few bugs, if I may. The release cost, if I talk about, is going to get obviously lower. The investment, the cost of investment is going to get reduced for a very specific reason, because you're following this methodology which is actually followed as a standard. And finally, when you're going to release the bugs, or I should say not the bugs, when you're going to release the new features, they are going to release at a very rapid pace. So the dependency, or I should say the bottleneck part of it, is going to be reduced. And if you are into management part of it, you are the CEO of the company, or the stakeholder of the company, you are the shareholder of the company, or the director level of the company, you do not understand all these technical terms. What's in for me? Why should I be actually following the DevOps methodology? For a very specific reason. Your application which you're going to build is going to have less number of bugs. Your product is not going to break when you're giving the demo of it. The product is going to have a better life cycle of it, so you understand what is happening, and you can actually reach out to the stakeholders, so I should say probably your customers, and you can say that we are releasing this feature, we are releasing this feature by next month, or I should say within 15 days. Obviously, the productivity of your organization altogether will increase because the bugs are already removed. And finally, the most important point is you have the increased revenue, because if you're not losing customers and if you're making new customers, the revenue has already increased. So you can understand the importance you're getting here when you're getting your team involved with the DevOps. Okay, now if you're still watching this video, I would like to first of all thank you for watching this video, because it takes ton of time for us and resources and the hard work to make this video. Now let's talk about the important question. Should you be outsourcing, and what are the various ways with which you can do it? Now first of all, let's try to understand why the companies are actually outsourcing this DevOps as an important service. If I talk about ourselves, we have around so many customers who are actually implementing DevOps. So we are not only consulting them, we are also actually helping them improve the pipeline. But first of all, let's try to understand. So obviously I'm not going to make a very big video out of it, but I'll be very genuine, I'll be very honest with you. Hiring a DevOps person, or I should say hiring a person who has a skill set of DevOps, is very difficult these days for a very specific reason. Almost every company needs a person who has DevOps expertise. They're offering them whatever the candidate wants from them. If someone is saying I want X amount, they are just giving them. So the poaching part of it, or not able to find the right talent at the right time, is actually increasing, and this is the statistics which is available across the internet. This is not something we are making up. So you can understand that this is actually becoming a scenario. So for hiring a dedicated person, or if I may, hiring an internal team, actually gets very difficult at this scenario, because since the inception of remote work, almost everyone who is sitting in a smaller town, or I should say from a smaller country, can actually get a good salary from the remote company, because obviously they are offering them a better option, or I should say better responsibilities, or I should say better job compared to the big companies or the other companies. Now, what are the two ways with which you can actually outsource your DevOps requirement? There are two ways. You can actually hire a company for the consulting purposes. So like, let's say you already have a DevOps methodology working, or you're planning to actually implement the DevOps methodology. In that particular scenario, you would be approaching a company and you would be asking them to consult you. They will be suggesting you what is supposed to be done and how it is supposed to be done. They will be not involved in the actual day-to-day work. So this is going to give you an advantage. Obviously, this is not going to cost you a lot, because obviously the physical intervention is very less. Secondly, since you're going to hire an expert, they will actually tell you what are the mistakes your company is making right now, instead of like discovering those mistakes maybe two months or 3 months from now. So this is the one option, or I should say one service model. Second service model is obviously outsourcing the whole process of the DevOps. So obviously you get the opportunity to actually monitor what is happening and giving the instruction, and the person who is actually doing the work, or the people, or I should say set of people who are already having that kind of an expertise, can actually work for us. So you can see there are two kinds of model of outsourcing. Obviously one is simple consulting, and secondly fully fledged service for the DevOps. Now let's discuss what are the advantages you're going to get if you're going to outsource your DevOps requirements. So first of all, you don't have to worry about the headcount. If you want to increase the headcount, or if you want to decrease the headcount, you don't have to worry about all the paperwork which is going to happen there. Secondly, you get the set of experts, because usually what happens, the people who are actually working in these kind of companies, if I talk about the outsourcing companies, they're not just sitting there. They're either working for client A, client B, or client C. So they already have that kind of an expertise which is required. Now, secondly, since they have worked with the multiple level, or I should say maybe large companies or small companies, so they have an extensive experience towards this industry. Now, the most important point is, now if you're going to go for the hiring of the DevOps engineer, obviously that is going to take around 3 months. So you can understand that it is going to take some time for you to actually get started. The person is going to get hired, so that is, let's say that it's going to take around 14 days, and after that it is going to be training. So like, obviously let's assume that it is going to take another 14 days. So from today, if you're planning to hire a person, you can assume that by the end of 4 months, I should say in the starting of 5th month, you can assume that that person will get started. And obviously if someone offers them something else, you have to restart the process. So you can understand that these kind of an issues already happen. Now, when you actually hire an outsourcing company, obviously they are dependent on the agreement which has been set up. So it is either completed fully, so obviously you get the full advantage of getting things done irrespective of what is happening around the globe. So you can understand, like, these are some of the advantages you get when you're actually outsourcing the DevOps requirement to a certain team. So in conclusion, you can see that there are so many things which are involved in DevOps altogether. The advantages, the disadvantages you get when you're building the in-house team, or I should say the outsourcing part of it. But in this economy, or I should say in this present time, if you're not unable to hire someone for the DevOps, if you're unable to find someone who is actually able to do that, if you feel like that this is something you can outsource, obviously there is a link which is given in the description of this particular video. Hit that link, talk to our expert, and understand what kind of a requirement can be satisfied and how soon you can actually get started, so that your application development can take a rapid pace and you guys can actually make a big deal out of it. So with this, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.